Hello and welcome to the Global Church Project. I'm Graham Hill. Ash Barker has been immersed in urban poor contexts for over 25 years, in the last 12 years in a Bangkok slum. He loves to help Christians join with Jesus in urban mission and making poverty personal. Ash Barker founded and led Urban Neighbours of Hope over 20 years ago. He's the author of 8 books, and in 2012 he helped start the International Society of Urban Mission to encourage Christians to respond to the dramatic rise of urban slum and squatter neighbourhoods. In November 2014, Ash Barker established the Newbigin Centre for Urban Hope, seeking to mobilise Christian leaders today for mission and service in our new urban world. Well, Ash Barker, welcome to the Global Church Project.
Thank you. Really appreciate being part of it. It's a quite exciting project.
20 years ago, you founded Urban Neighbours of Hope and moved to Bangkok. Can you tell us something about Urban Neighbours of Hope and then something about the move to Bangkok?
Yeah, so in 1993 we began Urban Neighbours of Hope, initially part of Youth for Christ in Melbourne. And the idea in those days was, how do we disciple young people into the church? That's what we were trying to do. And we were working in jails and detention centres. And after a while we realised these young people were not coming from every neighbourhood. They were just coming from a few high poverty places, in Melbourne, that were really struggling, multicultural places, estates, public housing estates. And so the question was, how can we prevent young people from getting into the jail system? And so it was in those images in those days, it was the cliff and the kids are falling and we're picking up the kids at the bottom of the cliff. How do we build a fence at the top? And so we started identifying those neighbourhoods, starting youth clubs and discipleship groups and mentoring programs, camping programs. But after we realised even then that actually programs were not going to be enough. We needed to invest our lives and share our lives, and we relocated into Springvale in Melbourne in end of 1992. And after a while realised actually the local churches in the area, as good and as lovely as they were really struggling with our young people and their families, and that those families needed to run churches themselves. So we talked to the Churches of Christ, who said, well, if we're open to a partnership. Alan Hirsch was very important to us in those days. He baptised me, and he kind of introduced us to the Churches of Christ, which is a really important part of my journey. And so the first few years was all around, really, we were kind of Youth for Christ workers, volunteers, essentially, is what happened. But we had really high turnovers of people. People would come for 6 months or 12 months and then kind of peter out. And in vulnerable communities, you need people to, trust is hard won. And if people are coming and going, you can't get traction, you can't build trust. And so in 1997, so we started, 93 as part of Churches of Christ. 97, we really had a rethink about the kind of wineskin we needed to be. And that's when we moved to becoming missionary order among the poor, having 3-year formation process to people to join us, to become a member. You committed for 3 years at a time, then 4 years at a time, then 7 years at a time. It was graduated entry, but then the idea was that you would really stick in the neighbourhood. Not so much in your formation years, you're a little bit free to come and go a bit, but because we were not kind of expecting it. But those who were members would really embed themselves in the life of the neighbourhood. And so we'd been going for about 10 years before we went to Bangkok in Melbourne. So in Bangkok for 12 years. Klong Toey slums are some about 100,000 people in a square kilometre, primarily Buddhist. And we had an invitation from the Churches of Christ in Thailand to come and to move in, relocate, to work with the community centre that was there. We had a sabbatical in 99, and in 2002 we moved across, as part of Urban Neighbours of Hope still.
So what kind of activities were you involved in as a family in Bangkok?
Yeah, Amy was 5 when we went across. In the early days, it's a really tough language to learn. It's the living conditions, open sewers, like dengue fever 5 times, and dysentery and typhoid and typhus, and wave after wave of things, really. So it was a little bit activity in the first 6 months with survival, to be used to everything. After a while, as a family, you become a very tight family unit actually living in those conditions, and actually your family enmeshes with other families, and so you do become. It is like a big urban village at its best, a slum community. At its worst, it is horrendous what can happen to children and the most vulnerable. So a lot of us are living our lives, Amy going to school and Ange working in social enterprise, me coaching football and leadership development and starting churches, lots of camps, lots of things to get people together. I mean, our basic premise was the people with the problems are the best ones to deal with them, and when those people work together, the best chance of change happens. So that was kind of the way we operated. So whether it be, my favourite moment really was our neighbour, her name is Pooh. It was a great name, isn't it? I mean, it is P-double-O. Yeah. And so whenever she'd cook food and would buy her food, we're getting Pooh food for dinner tonight. But the price of rice went through the roof. Yep. She couldn't afford to pay to sell her food at the prices she was doing it. People couldn't afford to buy it if she put the prices up. And so she was getting further and further into debt. So Ange worked with her, could she start a cooking school? She was such a good cook and such a vivacious kind of person. And before we knew it, Cooking with Pooh got started as a cooking school. It became the number 1 thing to do on TripAdvisor within 6 months. Number 2 was the Grand Palace, and then the cookbook went Cooking with Pooh. It actually won. Someone put it in the Frankfurt Book Fair, and it won the oddest book title of the year. And then comedians picked it up.
Well, my daughter and I have done the class, Cooking with Pooh.
Yes.
And I think it got profiled on the BBC or something
BBC
too,
did an interview. Jamie Oliver cooked with her. I mean, she sold 30,000 copies. I think my next book is going to be Mission with Pooh.
Mission with Pooh. You should. Doing Mission with Pooh.
Yeah, and so, our families were, we'd go away on holidays together. It wasn't just about how can we do a program, how can we fix someone's problem. These were genuinely part of our families. And we did love it there.
What's some of the difficulties that you face as a family in those sorts of environments where there's poverty, there's family pressures, education, all that kind of thing?
For Amy growing up, and my son was born there, Amy was 5 when we went across. For Amy and even Aiden, their lives were terrific as children because they got to know lots of people. For Amy, it got really tough once she got to kind of 11, 12, 13, because a lot of her peers in the slum community were being picked off for prostitution, being sent away, drugs, alcohol, jail, all those things were happening. And Amy was only 11, 12 years old. She'd be playing with a kid one day and then that kid would be in a brothel the next. I mean, that was pretty confronting for a little girl. She went to an international school, so there was a kind of a life outside of the slum community that she was seeing. And she just, after a while, could relate to the kinds of suffering that people do. She still said in the end, look, we are actually all the same. We've got different parents and different experiences, but actually we are the same. So I think she felt it as a child, what was going on. And actually those worlds, the slum world and the expat international world, got further apart as she got older. And that became more difficult for her. So I think the difficulties with that we're choosing to live in a slum community, other people are not. Yeah. We couldn't actually live the expat world either. Yeah. And so those two worlds getting further apart. I remember one day I picked Amy up from her friends. It was a birthday party. I went to pick her up on a motor scooter. It's a huge house. The dad collects sports cars and Lamborghinis, all these kind of things. And I'm out the front on my little motor scooter and take her back to the slum community. So I'm sure it was an embarrassment to her. When she got a bit older, she did year 11 and year 12 back in Australia, last 2 years of high school. And she's doing university at the moment. She's coming next week to visit us here. But it was, I'd be lying if I said it was an easy ride for Amy, because it was not. Aiden's interesting. He was born there. So his first experience of the West living has been here in the UK this last 6 months. He'd been backward and forward to Australia a little bit, but actually this is the first time he's really lived outside of Thailand. And so it's a challenge for him now, actually. He feels Thai. He doesn't feel Australian at all. My folks are British, so there is a kind of heritage here that he can relate to. But it's a challenge for him to transition. We're living in a real high density, multiracial, urban poverty context here. And so it is. He's the only white kid on the block. So it's not an easy conditions for him either here.
How did you do mission in a Buddhist context where John 3:16 isn't necessarily seen as good news?
Yes, it is. I mean, to tease it out a little bit, I mean, the word for God is prajao, and so that means king. Love is an attachment. It causes suffering. It's a desire causes suffering in Buddhist worldview. God so loved the world's an illusion. And so you've got a king causing suffering in an illusionary world and then killing his own son, and eternal life when you believe in reincarnation, going around the karmic cycle. I mean, it's just not good news. So the way we approached it, I must admit, at the 5-year mark, we thought, whoa, what we're talking about, even in good Thai, I'd improved by that stage. And it is a tough language. I mean, five tones and 44 consonants, 32 vowels. You know, it's a really tough. So to say things in Thai is tough, but then to say them and for them to have no resonance, no kind of traction at all, what we were saying, what people were understanding was so different, was really difficult. So we thought at one point, can we share the gospel here? We just don't know if we can. Where we got to actually was reading a lot of work from around Asia. A woman from Hong Kong who'd worked a lot with factory workers talked about needing change of experiences, attitude, and knowledge. And actually that's kind of where we got to, particularly experiences as a starting point for people. One of my neighbours, Jim, I mean, he gets beaten up by a mafia organised crime group, breaks his arm, and prays to God, God, if you're real, make yourself real to me. And as we kind of talked it through, and he's a motorbike taxi driver, he couldn't work, and so if you can't work, you can't eat. And so he, I mean, in incredible agony really, God, if you're real, make yourself real. Goes to sleep, has a dream. In the dream, Jesus grabs his arm, heals his arm, and when he wakes up, he's healed. Now, we suddenly open to talk about Jesus. And so the person of Jesus, rather than the ideology or the doctrine of Jesus, experiences of Jesus, is really important. But then there wasn't the knowledge piece, and for us, we used a lot of George Patterson's work, the basic commands of Jesus, repent, believe, receive the Holy Spirit, be baptized and live it, and just one command at a time kind of work with Jim, and so that he got to practice what Jesus calls us to do. And then the attitudes are the last things, by and large, in all our churches, actually. A lot of people describe themselves as Buddhists who had met Jesus and Jesus was the centre of their lives, but identifying with the rest of the Christian community took time for some folks, and some folks never did, and that was not an area we pushed. In actual fact, if we had pushed, okay, you're not going to be a Buddhist, you are going to be a Christian, that would have been very difficult for families. So we didn't push there, but we allowed people to self-identify, and that was important so that people weren't feeling like they were just by themselves, this small little kind of funny group, but actually they were part of something bigger. And for Jim, I mean, and for most Thais actually, to be Thai is to be Buddhist. It's got nothing to do with religion actually. It's far more about culture and not being Western, not being part of Western culture, which is identified with Christianity in people's minds. So to say I'm a Christian, if you said that out loud, people think, oh, you're giving up being Thai, you've become a Westerner. That's what people think. And so we had to say, no, Jesus is for you. Jesus is among you. He's there before Westerners came. And so the attitude was another piece we had to work on, but that was the most sensitive to deal with.
So is there a move in Thailand for people to say, look, I'm not a Christian, but I am a Thai follower of Jesus, or some kind of version of that?
Yeah, and that's what a lot of people in our church did, but they really came against the traditional Thai Christian church. It was really... Because people have made incredible sacrifices to become, they've lost their families, they've lost children, they've lost wealth, to be able to say that. And so folks who were saying, well, actually, I'm half and half, or some people say, Jesus is central, but actually I'm still a Buddhist. A lot of the kind of particularly the upper class Thai Christians really had struggled with that. But the beauty of having church planting movements, and we didn't have lots of churches, but we did have some, and there was more than one. And so there was a group of people going through it together, and so they could support each other on the journey, and that was really important.
And you've recently, as a family, moved to the UK. Can you tell us something about what you're doing there and with the Newbigin Centre?
Yeah, it kind of came as a surprise for us. It wasn't something we pre-organised, like a lot of things in my life. I mean, even coming to Bangkok, it was, after visiting on a sabbatical, it was like, wow, I'm at home, it's where I'm supposed to be. And then as we teased that out, the opportunities, invitation came to Bangkok. With the UK, it was similar actually. Urban Neighbours of Hope had been invited to come to the UK by the Churches of Christ here, and Springvale College were keen to make a connection with us. There was a public housing site not far from where we are that said, well, there's an invitation for you to come if you'd like to. So we had 2 workers from Melbourne come. I came across as international director, and after a week it was like, wow, if I had another life, I think I'd like to do this. We're quite settled in Bangkok, and we actually probably thought we were going to die there. Like we thought that's where we'd be for the rest of our lives. But we had about 17 different entities that were all run by Thai folks by that stage. We had a really strong team. There's another level of leadership that was coming up through Urban Neighbours of Hope, and as a founder, you kind of have some calls to make. Do you let that next level kind of take it up? Do you get out of the way? Or do you kind of batten down the hatches and make it the way you want it to be? And I really felt it was time to let go, and that I'd taken things as far as I could. And so where we were going to go next, this invitation to Birmingham and my, let's say, British heritage, really did feel like coming home. When I talked to Springvale College, I said, look, we'd love a centre for urban mission. Would you be interested in that? And for me, it was almost, I had my PhD, I had all these experiences, really wanting to empower others now. This is my next season of life. How can we, mobilise and equip and support people for urban work now? As well as do it ourselves. But the question was, what would Ange do? I mean, my wife is a force of nature. I mean, she has 5 good ideas before breakfast and 9 are going before dinner time. So what would she do in a place like Birmingham? Well, 2 weeks after we resigned from in October 2013, we kind of started the transition out. But 2 weeks in that middle of October, Steve Chalk from the UK happened to be coming through Bangkok and said, Ange, if you're interested in Birmingham, we've got these 2 schools. They were failing government schools. What we want is a community hub leader, someone who can build a sense of community, who can do social enterprise. You'll have a blank slate. Would you come and do it? The name of that neighbourhood was Winson Green. And I've heard this name Winson Green before, and I honestly couldn't work out where it was. It was only when we went into Winson Green it all clicked. This was where Leslie Newbigin, when he came back from India after 30 years, came and was a pastor. And so when we go, what do we call this centre? Well, I'd love it to be called the Newbigin Centre, And we were offered the diocese in Birmingham to look, we've got this old big vicarage here, would you like it? You could base your stuff there. And then I'd love to call it the Newbigin Centre. I don't even know how to get permission from the family. First Tuesday we're in the UK. We were in Melbourne for a little bit, helping our daughter finish high school, and then came across. And Steve Chalk said, well, actually, I do know John Newbigin, Leslie's son, and I can ask him for you. And so the family gave us permission within a month of being here. And hopefully we move into the Newbigin Centre as the vicarage, where we'll base ourselves for people to come and live and serve, as well as running our training, retreats, all kinds of things from there. I mean, this is how do we mobilise, form and equip Christian leaders for our new urban world. That's what we're trying to do.
I want to ask you some questions about mission ministry in urban slums. So there's been quite a bit of growth of slums around the world. Can you tell us something about the growth?
Yeah.
And secondly, I think it's the case that very few Christians are actually working in those slum and squatter communities. And
that's right.
Is that right? And what do you see going on?
Yeah, I mean, this is some of the 21st century is the urban century. It's the first time that the majority of humans live in urban areas. I mean, 1800, only 3% of the world's population lived in urban areas. Now it's over 50% of people. It's probably going to be 2/3, within a couple of decades. 1 in 3 people live in urban poverty. 1 in 6 people live in urban slums. That's currently. You fast forward this 100,000 new people a day moving into slum communities or being born there. I mean, the numbers are huge. What is difficult for us to comprehend is actually the growth of these cities. A place like Bangkok, I mean, it's around about 20 million people now in the greater metropolitan area. It's going to be 40 million within 20 years, and they're just not prepared.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not coping now. Never mind double the size of it. I mean, it's almost the size of Australia growing in one geographical area, in 20 years. So, and that's common for cities all around, particularly cities in the so-called 1040 window, North Africa, Middle East and Asia. That's where 2 out of 3 slum residents currently live, in those areas. And so the challenge is, how do you... It isn't just about souls at this point. This is about people's lives, where they live, how they live. The shalom of God is about where people and God and place are in harmony, then cities of the world are a huge challenge, and slums particularly. And what makes a slum is about living conditions. Many are squatters, so that's legal. There's no legal protection of the law. And there is a kind of, some would call them settlements. I like the word neighbourhood because settlement kind of has a temporary nature. These people really shouldn't be here. But actually, most of these cities would grind to a halt if you got rid of the slum residents. They just wouldn't be able to function because these are the people who are keeping the city alive and making it work. So they should be legitimised. They should have rights to where they're living, and they should have opportunity. But it is a really complex problem. There are some thinkers that think, okay, give all the squatters their rights, as actually we did in places like Australia and the US and other places. There were squatters' rights. And if you give them their rights, then that, they'd be worth trillions of dollars. All the aid in the world could be given to squatters with one sign of a pen, if there were squatters' rights. But actually, it's more complicated than that. That would help, but actually, what happens to the next 100,000 tomorrow and the day after? So it's not a long-term solution, but squatters' rights are a really crucial part of it, land rights.
And what's happening amongst the people of God in those areas? So every now and then you hear about Christians from the West or even from home countries that do sort of drive-by mission. But what is God actually doing in the slums themselves?
Yeah, Klong Toey, it's a really big slum community, and we would have Christians that would come in. We had a Korean group come in, 2 big tour buses, and they came in for the day. They gave out medicine, they cut hair, all the best intentions of the world. And there were literally over 100 of them providing this. People would line up, get their service, come down. They couldn't come back down without going past the Korean evangelist and signing up yes for Jesus or no for Jesus. And after being helped, they were not going to say no to Jesus. So, people got their hair cut, Koreans got their souls, and everyone was kind of happy, except, of course, for the hairdressers who all missed out on a day's wage and went hungry. So the problem with slums is they are fragile ecosystems. Yeah. And so you really, when you go in guns blazing and think you're going to sort it out without working with the leadership that's already there, it's really unfair and can make all kinds of damaging kind of things happen without intending it to happen. And so I think in a place like Klong Toey, over the years, we saw that there were believers there. There were small groups who were there was only one church when we first arrived. There were about half a dozen by the time we left. That wasn't all us, but we were involved in some of them, helping get some of them going and supporting the church that was there. What's going on there? If Klong Toey is a microcosm of what's happening in lots of places, it is actually really difficult because, in the West or even in animistic areas, there's a lot more freedom to choose. There's a kind of a consumer mentality, actually. You can kind of pick and choose what works. And in a slum community, there isn't as much choice, and you're in survival mode. You're trying to work out what's going to happen today. And so even time to think and pray, and when you're trying to work out where your meal's going to come from today, that is really tough. So we'd run church on Sundays, we ran church on Friday night, and we did it as a meal, so people would come, everyone would contribute something, we'd sit on the floor, and people would see miracles happen, changes in their lives. There's no doubt about that. But it's very slow and you're very patient, and small scale change over a long time, and it is, particularly as Westerners, where you want to show you've contributed something. It's a very, very difficult place to work.
There's a lot of talk these days about incarnational mission. What does it look like when it's expressed in slum areas?
Yeah, I mean, let me say what it shouldn't look like. It shouldn't look like. There are limits to the metaphor of how we use incarnation.
Yeah.
If we think, Eugene Peterson's version, the word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighbourhood, is kind of used as this is what we should be doing because Jesus did it. I don't actually like that. I don't think we can. I don't think, just to unpack that metaphor a little bit, I don't think Melbourne is heaven. And I don't think, I'm the Messiah, becoming flesh and blood.
Maybe if you're coming from Sydney.
That could be right. Do you know what I mean? So the Messiah complexes of too many workers hurts everybody. It hurts the worker, it hurts the people who are receiving them, it doesn't respect them. So I like to see incarnational as incarnational mission. And the Trinity is incarnating, actually. It's a living, breathing, working persons who's there. For me, it's following Jesus, who's the Redeemer and reconciling all things. It's the Spirit who empowers, and so we participate with the Spirit, and we're joining with the Creator to recreate what was intended here. And so I prefer that kind of style, that we're joining the Trinity here, rather than we're the Messiah, we've come from heaven, we're going to make this place heaven, make the same as Melbourne, make the same as the middle class. I think there's some real limitations in our language about that. But used well, and I'd say Trinitarian incarnational mission is it's really exciting.
And you use a motif enfleshed hope.
Yeah, and because so to incarnate, it means to enflesh or to make real. So it's making real the hope of the true God. And so we're trying to see how put flesh and blood on the hope. And that's not just us, that's what God is doing. So our churches are enfleshing hope. Our social enterprises are enfleshing hope. When our workers stand up for justice, they're enfleshing, making real the hope that God has for the place.
In Risky Compassion, you build upon the idea of the compassionate Samaritan. Why is that idea important to you, and how does it resonate with your experience of mission work in Bangkok?
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of... I wrote the book around finishing up my time in Bangkok, actually trying to look back at it. And I just found what the Samaritan did differently to the priest and the Levite was a challenge to me, because I was more of the priest and the Levite, actually, than the Samaritan. So there's some aspirational things. There's also, I noticed others in my neighbourhood acting like Samaritans. So the kind of things, walking a dangerous road and travelling a dangerous path. As a Westerner moving into a slum, I can really relate to that. Priest and Levite were probably on their way home, actually. They were coming from Jerusalem to Jericho. Jericho is where the priests and Levites mostly lived. And so they were on their way home. It wasn't as dangerous for them as the Samaritan was, who had money, who had all kinds of things on him, probably a trader, coming down. And we're in a time of great nationalism and people hiding in caves. Well, certainly it would have been far more dangerous for the Samaritan. So I can relate to the danger of it and the risks associated with it. Seeing a person suffering, I mean, Klong Toey saw suffering happen all the time. People dying unnecessarily, children with disabilities getting treated really badly. So we saw suffering. The priest and the Levite saw but decided not to see. And they had all kinds of rationale for it. The person dying on the side of the road would have made them ceremonially unclean. So that which was supposed to be for good, the law, actually becomes something that damages a person. Feels compassion. I think towards the end there of my time, my heart did get hard, actually. And so what do you do when you no longer feel compassion? And then coming close, the Samaritan comes close, the priest and Levite keep going past. What does it mean to share your life and to risk yourself with others? And then the Samaritan does something that helps. Those are the kind of the themes that I explored. The priest and the Levite actually, as part of the people of Israel, were supposed to make that it wasn't supposed to be a place where people get hit and hurt and damaged and half killed. The promised land was supposed to flow with milk and honey for everyone in that community. And so, I guess I reflected on those themes. And actually, I saw it far more in my Thai neighbours than in myself. I mean, when there was a huge flood, we had, in Bangkok, 800 people died, a million people were affected in floods, and literally our neighbours, said we've got to do something to help one of our guys whose house was stuck there, his tools were there. And so they got boats and we went out there and 800 people died, some from drowning, some from electricity, but some from crocodiles, because there was a huge crocodile farming industry in Bangkok. And when the floods came, they just went up and over the top. And these huge reptiles would be in suburbs and neighbourhoods and villages all throughout Thailand at this time. And the water sat there for months, just kind of sitting there. And our guys, my football coaches said, we're going to help. We're going to go. We're going to get medicines. We're going to get the guys' tools. We went out there. I mean, it was pretty scary. I went with them. And it was like, you can see crocodiles everywhere in your imagination. Yeah. At one point, it got really quiet and you could see kind of ripples on the water with these boats and medicines. And someone grabbed my leg. I squealed like a little girl. And it was just one of my football coaches playing a joke on it. But it was amazing what those guys did. As they reached out, they risked themselves for the sake of someone they cared about. God did something in their lives, And remember, they gave out medicine. Who are you guys? The Red Cross and the Army aren't allowing people in here. So who are you guys? So we're from Klong Toey Slum. The Slum, Klong Toey, the big, notorious place. Yeah, we're from there. Keep fighting on. And, there's that saying, isn't there, from T.S. Eliot, only those who risk going too far can find out how far they can go. And our guys became different people, actually, from risking themselves. So I was inspired by that, and inspired by the Good Samaritan, inspired by what I saw, and challenged, actually, to don't come with all the solutions, with all the compassion, actually. You join with it.
Well, that's a good segue into the next question. I want to ask you about strategies for connection, solidarity, for transformation. But I don't want to rush there too quickly, because I want to ask you, what do we need to think about before our mind moves to solutions and strategies? Because I think as Westerners, with our Messiah complexes, we tend to always find ourselves in that place. But how does that thinking need to be framed before we begin to talk about?
Even from the early days of Urban Neighbours of Hope, we were talking about priorities of presence, being available, looking at where God's at work, where are people's strengths and passions. I mean, people like to do, when we started off, you've got to do a needs analysis and look at how bad the community is and fix up the need, find a need and fix it was kind of actually, I know it's all changing now, asset-based community development is the fancy kind of term for it. But for us, it was about what are people good at? Someone like Pooh, for example, could cook. She could teach people how to cook, build with that. But it takes time. I mean, we knew Pooh 5 years before there was that kind of junction in her life where she was ready, we were ready. And you can't, if you try to do it the other way around, okay, we're going to find someone with a funny name, we're going to help them to cook, we're going to and that's that kind of mechanical can-do, fix it. It's totally, the incarnation approach is totally different. It's saying God's at work here. And we've got to be available. We've got to be aware. We've got to build a relationship, build trust with people, join in with what God's doing. And from there, people with the problems can deal with them. And those people, when they work together, the best chance of change happens. But it happens because of people's strengths and gifts and passions rather than their deficits.
How do you think that the Spirit of Christ wants to speak to the Western Church today through the lives and experiences of slum communities and also through Christians in the slums?
It's a good question. I think there's a lot going on that just needs to be amplified. I mean, the voices of people who are suffering, who are crying, who are trying, experimenting. And so solidarity with them and the bridges that need to be built to support them is actually not easy to do. I mean, I love World Vision's work in rural areas. They're terrific. They can look at a whole region, and within a 10-year period, through child sponsorship, they can sort out schooling and clinics and churches and do amazing change in a 10-year period. But World Vision, part of my research in PhD was looking at this, and their own reports are saying, well, we can't do that in slums. We can't. How do we network everyone in the slum? Well, there's organised crime groups. There's mafia groups. There's multinational corporations. They don't want to work together. In fact, they're competing with each other. The churches are competing with each other. It's a muddy pool to kind of swim in. And if we put money in, there's no guarantee. We don't know what's going to happen in 10 years. We can predict it when we're kind of in charge, and we can pull people together. When people can't and don't know how to work together, and that people are coming and going, the transits. I mean, child sponsorship doesn't work in slums by and large because you don't know how long a kid is going to be there. Yeah. So if you're sponsoring a child and they're only there for 6 months, you've got to get that letter, I'm sorry, we don't know where your child is. Yeah. And by the time it gets to you, it's probably 12 months after the child's gone. And so it's very difficult to use those kind of strategies in rural areas for solidarity and for voice in the same way. So I think the way community organisers, how do we support community organisers? How do we hear them? How do we train them? Those people who can go into communities, local folks, and be able to bring people together to work together. I mean, I think that's the need, to hear those voices, to work with them, support them. It's not going to be big money. It's not going to be big money projects that do it. I think the other thing is that there is need for advocacy and structural change and land rights. And so the pressure that Christians can put on externally to support internal voices is actually significant. And if you can find folks who really want to take land rights seriously within this and stand with those people, that would be amazing.
Is there anything else you want to say to us today?
Oh, I just think the project is important. I think the reason it's important is unless these voices are being heard, we're missing what God is doing, the most significant things that God is doing in the world. I love the West, from the West, I'm beneficiary of all that the West has done. But actually what God is doing is much bigger and much more important than what's happening in the West. And I think these voices need to be amplified and put as loud as we possibly can, because we all need to hear it.
Ash Barker, thank you for joining us, the Global Church Project.
Thank you.
Thank you. The Global Church Project is located at www.theglobalchurchproject.com. On our website you'll find a wide range of interviews and resources for colleges, universities and churches. I look forward to your company next time. From me, goodbye.